بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم إن الله وملائكته يصلون على النبي يا أيها الذين آمنوا صلوا عليه وسلموا تسليما
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد.
الله أكبر الله أكبر جل جلاله ربي الله أكبر الله أكبر جل جلاله ربي أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له أشهد أن محمدا رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم
وآل محمد.
أشهد أن محمدا رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم
وآل محمد.
أشهد أن مولانا أمير المؤمنين وإمام المتقين عليا ولي الله صلوات الله وسلامه عليه أشهد أن مولانا أمير المؤمنين وإمام المتقين عليا حجة الله صلوات الله وسلامه عليه حي على الصلاة حي على الصلاة حي على الفلاح حي على الفلاح حي على خير العمل حي على خير العمل الله أكبر الله أكبر لا إله إلا الله لا إله إلا الله صلى الله على محمد وعلى محمد وصلى الله عليه وسلم.
vigil, and the rest of the program will continue inside here after the candlelight.
मैं सदा देती रही तू न आया गाजी आले इमरान कहाँ और जिंदान कहाँ ये बहन कैद हुई तू न आया गाजी जो विदा सर से चीनी हमको पानी ना मिले तेरी खुशबू तो रहे तेरे बाजू न कटे चाहे मशकी जाची दे ये मगर हो न सका तेरे बाजू है जुदा मुझ पे है तशना लंबी तू न आया जुदा सर से छीनी रही
دھوپ میں تو تھا شجر، تجھ سے آباد تھا گھر، اے برہنا میرا سر، کیا نہیں تجھ کو خبر، اے علمدار وفا اس بہن کو باخدا، تجھ سے دارستی بھری تو نہ آیا حاضی، جبر کا سر سے چینی میں صدا دیتی رہی تو نہ آیا حاضی، آ گئی شام عالم لٹ گئے لے حرم، ریت پر جلتی ہوئی ہو گیا ٹھنڈا عالم، پرسہ دینے کے لیے مجھ سے ملنے کے لیے آ گئے بابا علی، تو نہ آیا حاضی، جبریدہ سر سے چینی میں صدا دیتی رہی تو نہ آیا حاضی، کیا کہوں شعر میں ہے میری ہم کو لیے یہ مسلمان سارے شہر در شہر گئے، خلقت کوفہ کبھی خلقت شام کبھی، اور ہاں ہم بے ہنسی تو نہ آیا حاضی، جبریدہ سر سے چینی میں صدا دیتی رہی تو نہ آیا حاضی، کتنی بے بس تھی بہن اے شہنشاہ وفا، نام لے لے کے میرا جب یہ ظالم نے کہا، ناز تھا جس پہ تجھے اب بلاؤ نہ اسے، اور میں روتی رہی تو نہ آیا حاضی، جبریدہ سر سے چینی میں صدا دیتی رہی تو نہ آیا حاضی، قید خانے میں قضا جب سکینہ کو ملی، دیکھے کرتے کا کفن بچی دفنائی گئی، اس غری نام تیرا صورت ناد علی، دکھ میں دہراتی رہی تو نہ آیا غازی، جبریدہ سر سے چینی میں صدا دیتی رہی تو نہ آیا غازی، محمد صلی اللہ أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا ونبينا وحبيب قلوبنا وطبيب نفوسنا هادينا ومولانا أبا القاسم محمد وعلى أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين أما بعد. Respected elders, brothers, sisters, youngsters, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Tonight we have gathered to remember the sacrifice of Imam Hussein alayhi salam, his family, his companions, and also the silent heroes that followed his path. I would like to highlight some points this evening, reminding myself first before I remind you. Imam makes a statement before he leaves Medina, and he says, "Inni lam akhruj ashran wala batira, wala mufsidan wala zalima. إنما خرجت لطلب الإصلاح في أمة جدي رسول الله وأمر بالمعروف وانهونا عن المنكر وأسيرة بسيرة جدي وأبي علي بن أبي طالب." He says that indeed I have not risen to create mischief, neither have I set out as an adventurer, nor have I come out to cause corruption or tyranny. I have risen solely to seek reform of the ummah of my grandfather. I want to command what is good and forbid what is evil, and I will follow the conduct of my grandfather and my father Ali ibn Abi Talib. Imam stood up because he saw that there was a need for awakening in the people. He had the will to see the change and the goodness in people. Islam was so tainted at that time that you had a person like Yazid being the Amir of the Muslims. And Imam stands up against this injustice to Islam as a whole. In the process, he had to sacrifice his own life and the lives of his friends and family. And for all this, he says, Ridam bi rida. It is solely for the purpose and the pleasure of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. If this mission teaches us anything, it is to serve and submit to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala at all times, even if it means sacrificing something for the greater good. The sacrifice of life is the ultimate sacrifice that Imam gives. Where do you find a man that after he loses everything, he stands in the midst of battle and he has lost every one of his family? He has lost his youthful sons and his brothers, and he stands in the middle of the battlefield saying, Ridam bi ridak, la ma'buda siwak. All that for the reformation of the Ummah, for the greater good of Islam, for generations to come, for you and I to be here today. The question that we are left with is that what can we sacrifice tonight? How can we serve Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? And above all, through Hussein, how can we reform ourselves? What are we willing to do to reform ourselves? Can we attempt to make small sacrifices? What are we willing to do to stop injustice in today's world? Whether it is in our homes, in our towns, in our cities, or on a global scale altogether. Every Thursday night in Ziyarat Warith we recite وَأُشْهِدُ اللَّهَ وَمَلَائِكَتَهُ وَأَنْبِيَاءَهُ وَرُسُلَهُ. We call upon four groups of people, four groups, and not ordinary groups, to say what? That, O Hussein, I call upon Allah to bear witness. I call upon the angels to bear witness. I call upon the Anbiya, the prophets, to bear witness. I call upon the messengers to bear witness. To bear witness to what? Anni bikum mu'min, that I believe in your message. وَبِيَا بِكُمْ مُوقِنْ, and I'm aware of your message. بِشَرَاعِ دِينِ وَخَوَاتِيمِ عَمَلِ, that I know the laws of my religion. And not only that, it continues to manifest in my action. وَقَلْبِي لِقَلْبِكُمْ سِلْمٌ. No, Imam, it is not only my understanding of you, it is not only the mere fact that I manifest that in my life. My heart is at peace with your heart and the people who sacrifice their lives for you. وَأَمْرِي لِأَمْرِكُمْ مُتَّبِعٌ. And all my affairs are based on your commands. So not only do I believe in the message of Hussein, and remember, we call upon four groups to bear witness to this every Thursday night. Not only do I believe in the message of Hussein, not only do I know my religion and its laws, but my actions manifest in it. And know my heart and your heart and the heart of all those who are with you is the same. And above all, whatever I do in my life, all my affairs are based on your commands. These are no ordinary groups that are bearing witness in front of Hussein, that we utter these statements every night. The Azaa of Hussein is a highly recommended action, but it is not an end to the means. It is a means to the end. And we therefore need to reflect, and we first need to identify the areas that we need to reform. We need to have the will to change. We need to start small. The sacrifice of life is the ultimate sacrifice. What can we sacrifice today? And all that should be solely for the pleasure of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. When we truly know the message of Hussein, when we practice it, when we manifest it in our lives, when we teach it to others, and when we are ready to die for it, that is when the Mahdi will make his reappearance. But until such a time that we are not ready, all these statements that we make are mere lip service. And let us look into history and into our world today, that those who live this lifestyle and who are ready to die for the truth are tonight remembered as these silent heroes. From Fizza alayhi salam, who was a companion of the Ahlul Bayt, who knew the Quran, because it is a criteria as a lover of Ahlul Bayt to know the Quran, would communicate based solely on the Quran. And as of today, we know the likes of Sheikh Nimr or the likes of Abu Muhandas al-Mahdi. May Allah bless all their souls. And these are the people who follow the path of Hussein that are remembered tonight. When we follow these examples of these peoples, then and only then can we truly say that we are Husseini. And then and only then can we be ready for the 12th Imam. السلام عليك يا أبا عبد الله وعلى الأرواح التي حلت بفنائك عليك مني سلام الله أبدا ما بقيت وبقي الليل والنهار. Please take a moment to reflect in silence on these words and ultimately blowing out your candles. Assalamu alaikum.
دعای فارج.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. اللهم كن لوليك الحجة ابن الحسن صلواتك عليه وعلى آبائه في هذه الساعة وفي كل ساعة وليا وحافظا وقائدا وناصرا ودليلا وعينا حتى تسكنه أرضك توعا وتمتعه فيها طويلا برحمتك يا أرحم الراحمين.
The candlelight vigil program has now concluded. The regular program will now continue on inside. Please make your way inside with 3 salawat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. ألف لام ميم. ذلك الكتاب لا ريب فيه هدى للمتقين الذين يؤمنون بالغيب ويقيمون الصلاة ومما رزقناهم ينفقون والذين يؤمنون بما أنزل إليك وما أنزل من قبلك وبالآخرة هم يوقنون أولئك على هدى من ربهم وأولئك هم المفلحون. إن الذين كفروا سواء عليهم أنذرتهم أم لم تنذرهم لا يؤمنون. ختم الله على قلوبهم وعلى سمعهم وعلى أبصارهم غشاوة ولهم عذاب عظيم. ومن الناس من يقول آمنا بالله وباليوم الآخر وباليوم الآخر وما هم بمؤمنين يخادعون الله والذين آمنوا وما يخدعون إلا أنفسهم وما يشعرون في قلوبهم مرض فزادهم الله مرضا ولهم عذاب أليم بما كانوا يكذبون وإذا قيل لهم لا تفسدوا في الأرض قالوا إنما نحن مصلحون ألا إنهم هم المفسدون ولكن لا يشعرون وإذا قيل لهم آمنوا كما آمن الناس قالوا أنؤمن كما آمن السفهاء ألا إنهم هم السفهاء ولكن لا يعلمون وإذا لقوا الذين آمنوا قالوا آمنا وإذا خلوا إلى شياطينهم قالوا إنا معكم إنما نحن مستهزئون الله يستهزئ بهم ويمدهم في طغيانهم يعمهون أولئك الذين اشتروا الضلالة بالهدى فما ربحت تجارتهم وما كانوا مهتدين مثلهم كمثل الذين استوقد نارا فلما أضاءت ما حوله ذهب الله بنورهم وتركهم في ظلمات لا يبصرون صم بكم عمي فهم لا يرجعون أو كصيب من السماء فيه ظلمات ورعد وبرق يجعلون أصابعهم في آذانهم من الصواعق حذر الموت والله محيط بالكافرين يكاد البرق يخطف أبصارهم كلما أضاء لهم مشوا فيه وإذا أظلم عليهم قاموا ولو شاء الله لذهب بسمعهم وأبصارهم إن الله على كل شيء قدير يا أيها الناس اعبدوا ربكم الذي خلقكم والذين من قبلكم لعلكم تتقون الذي جعل لكم الأرض فراشا والسماء بناء وأنزل من السماء ماء فأخرج به من الثمرات رزقا لكم فلا تجعلوا لله أندادا وأنتم تعلمون وإن كنتم في ريب مما نزلنا على عبدنا فأتوا بسورة من مثله وادعوا شهداءكم من دون الله إن كنتم صادقين فإن لم تفعلوا ولن تفعلوا فاتقوا النار التي وقودها الناس والحجارة أعدت للكافرين وبشر الذين آمنوا وعملوا الصالحات أن لهم جنات تجري من تحتها الأنهار كلما رزقوا منها من ثمرة رزقا قالوا هذا الذي رزقنا من قبل وأتوا به متشابها ولهم فيها أزواج مطهرة وهم فيها خالدون إن الله لا يستحيي أن يضرب مثلا ما بعوضة فما فوقها فأما الذين آمنوا فيعلمون أنه الحق من ربهم وأما الذين كفروا فيقولون ماذا أراد الله بهذا مثلا يضل به كثيرا ويهدي به كثيرا وما يضل به إلا الفاسقين الذين ينقضون عهد الله من بعد ميثاقه ويقطعون ما أمر الله به أن يوصل ويفسدون في الأرض أولئك هم الخاسرون كيف تكفرون بالله وكنتم أمواتا فأحياكم ثم يميتكم ثم يحييكم ثم إليه ترجعون هو الذي خلق لكم ما في الأرض جميعا ثم استوى إلى السماء فسواهن سبع سماوات وهو بكل شيء عليم صدق الله العلي العظيم
اللهم صل على محمد.
محمد وآل محمد صلوات.
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد.
आ गई ज़ैनब मदीने में बपा को राम है आज कब्रे मुस्तफ़ा पर एक हुजूम आम है आज कब्रे मुस्तफ़ा पर एक हुजूम आम है بیردا زینب ہے سورج آج کیوں چھپتا نہیں بیردا زینب ہے سورج آج کیوں چھپتا نہیں وہ مدینہ تھا نبی کا یہ دیار شام ہے آ گئی زینب مدینے میں بپا کوہرام ہے کہتے تھے فضا چھنی جاتے ہے زینب کی ردا کہتے تھے فضا چھنی جاتے ہے زینب کی ردا یا علی آو مدد کو یہ تمہارا کام ہے آ گئی زینب مدینے میں بپا کوہرام ہے نام بر کولا بیٹے کی دکھا کر بول شاہ نام بر کولا بیٹے کی دکھا کر بول شاہ یہ ہے سہرا کی تمنا اس کا اکبر نام ہے آ گئی زینب مدینے میں بپا کوہرام ہے زینب مزتر کے ایک دل پر 72 داغ ہے زینب مزتر کے ایک دل پر 72 داغ ہے حاضر دربار ہونا موت کا پیغام ہے آ گئی زینب مدینے میں بپا کوہرام ہے کربلا کے واقعے کو ایک مدت ہو گئی کربلا کے واقعے کو ایک مدت ہو گئی سید سجاد کی آنکھوں میں پھر بھی شام ہے آ گئی زینب مدینے میں بپا کوہرام ہے آج कब्र मुस्तफ़ा पर एक हुजूम आम है आज कब्र मुस्तफ़ा पर और मोहम्मद वाल मोहम्मद सल्लल्लाहु अलैहि
Our guest speaker, Sheikh Anwar Jaffer. Dear elders, brothers and sisters in Iman, Assalamu alaikum, Jamia wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Surah Fatiha is requested for all marhumin listed on the screen, as well as all other marhumin. Surah Mubarak al-Fatiha. Ashfa Maries is requested for all those who are in need here and elsewhere. Let us recite together. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Amma yujibul mustarra iza da'ah wa yakshifu as-su'. Amma yujibul mustarra iza da'ah wa yakshifu as-su'. Amma yujibul mustarra iza da'ah wa yakshifu as-su'. أما يجيب المضطر إذا دعاه ويكشف السوء أما يجيب المضطر إذا دعاه ويكشف السوء Ya Allah. The Muharram and Safar Fund is still open. Please see Brother Abbas Alu or Brother Sibtain Yusufali in the men's side or Sister Fatima Abdul Hussein in the sister's side to make a donation. You may also use the QR code displayed on the screen in order to donate. There have been a few lost and found items in the ladies' side. If you've misplaced any valuables, please see Sister Fatima Abdul Hussein. We'll now inshallah have majlis by Sheikh Anwar Jaffer. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين سيدنا ونبينا وحبيب قلوبنا والشفيع لذنوبنا وتبيب نفوسنا أبي القاسم محمد والصلاة والسلام على أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين المظلومين ولعنة الله على أعدائهم أجمعين إلى قيام يوم الدين وفقنا الله وإياكم بعلم وأمل صالح إن شاء الله بذكر الصلاة على محمد وآل محمد اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد وعجل فرجهم أما بعد فقد قال الله عز وجل في كتابه الكريم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم يا أيها الذين آمنوا لما تقولون ما لا تفعلون كبر مقتا عند الله أن تقولوا ما لا تفعلون آمنا بالله صدق الله العلي العظيم. Respected elders, brothers and sisters, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Within the Holy Quran, we find that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in many of the verses strikes a contrast between those who have knowledge and those who do not have knowledge. So for example, in a very rhetorical verse, a question is asked. A rhetorical question is asked in which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, قُلْ هَلْ يَسْتَوِيَ الَّذِينَ يَعْلَمُونَ وَالَّذِينَ لَا يَعْلَمُونَ. Do you consider those who have knowledge and those who do not have knowledge to be on the same level, to be equal? And the answer is, of course not. Those who have knowledge are vastly different to those who do not have knowledge. An alim is different from a person who is considered to be a jahil. And the idea behind this is a person who has knowledge is able to guide his life, is able to understand the purpose as to why he lives in this world. A person who has knowledge, a person who has invested his time and who's invested his money in gaining knowledge, is able to recognize and remind himself constantly as to why he exists in this world. Whereas a person who is jahil, he lives his life in a state of heedlessness. A famous example that's given by the ulama, they say, imagine a person who is about to traverse a very dark place. Imagine a dark forest. And as he is about to traverse into this dark forest, he has no means of any guidance. There's no phone, there's no mobile, there's no cell phone in his hands, for example. There's no light, no torch, anything. And he's about to traverse in this dark forest. Obviously, you would think that this person is now in state of danger. He could be attacked by an animal, or he could, for example, trip and fall and injure himself. He could potentially die simply because he does not have some light to guide him that allows him to deter all of the potential dangers that exist within the forest. In comparison to a person who has a light, for example, is able to traverse the dark forests from one end to the other. Is able to see his surroundings, is able to see all of the potential dangers that exist, and he's able to deter himself from any harm. Likewise, a person who has knowledge is a person who traverses this dark world, this dark forest, with some sort of light with him. And he is able to traverse and protect himself from all of the different potential dangers that exist. And likewise, a person who has no knowledge, a person who is a jahil, is prone to many of the dangers of this world. And so the idea behind this is that a person who gains knowledge, or gaining knowledge generally speaking, ijmalan, within the religion of Islam is something that is advocated by the Ahlul Bayt alayhim salam. طلب العلم فريضة لكل مسلم ومسلمة. That gaining knowledge is a farida, it is an obligation upon every Muslim and every Muslim. You find, for example, there's a famous ayah in the Holy Quran in which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, يَرْفَعِ اللَّهُ الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا مِنْكُمْ. And Allah raises the station of those who believe. As in a person who has iman settled in his heart, naturally Allah will raise his position spiritually. وَالَّذِينَ أُوتُوا الْعِلْمَ الدَّرَجَاتِ. But a person who has ilm, his station, his position in the eyes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is raised multiple times, more faster than the person who simply believes. An alim, for example, when he performs an act of ibadah, it's different to when a jahil performs an act of ibadah. Holistically speaking, I pray salah, you pray salah, as well as one of our greatest maraja prays salah. What's the difference between our salah? It depends on the ilm that we have. The more ilm that we have surrounding the religion of Islam, naturally it gives heaviness. It makes that salah weighty in the eyes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. When an alim prays salah, it is much more weightier than when a jahil prays salah. And the effect of it therefore is very much manifested in their lives. A person who has knowledge is more affected by his acts of ibadah compared to a person who has little knowledge. So you find that within the Holy Quran, within the Holy Scripture, the Holy Book, within the riwayat of the Ahlul Bayt alayhim salam, there's a heavy emphasis in the idea of gaining knowledge. Spiritually, it has an effect within our lives. In terms of reward, it has an effect in our lives. How does it have a spiritual effect in our lives? There's a very interesting discussion conducted by the ulama. When they speak about isma, infallibility, yes, we believe that there are 14 infallibles. They were born infallible, and they deterred themselves from any type of sin or any type of licentiousness. However, we as human beings, as their followers, we are capable of becoming infallible ourselves. Ismatul iktisabiyya, we can earn that position. And it's very easy when a person refrains from all of the sins that have been made haram for us. You find that essentially this person can achieve the state of infallibility as well as adhering to all of the different wajibat. What's beautiful in this discussion is that the source of infallibility is knowledge. It's not like the Ahlul Bayt alayhim salam as well as the Anbiya were programmed by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to refrain from sins. No, it is because of their knowledge that they chose to refrain from sins. It is as if the veils that were there in front of their eyes were removed, and they were capable of seeing the effects of certain sins and the effects of certain actions. So as an example, if someone was to, for example, present to you a meal that is poisoned, it's just hypothetically, it's just an example, a meal that is poisoned, and you know that that meal is poisoned. You know that you, by eating that particular meal, will be devastating, will be fatal to your own life. Would you go about eating that meal? So no, because you have ilm. You have knowledge of the effect that would occur if you were to consume that particular meal. Likewise, the A'immat al-Athar, likewise the Anbiya, they were able to understand the effects of certain actions, and they deterred themselves from performing those actions. When you look at the lives of our ulama, therefore, the struggles that they have gone through in their lives, the heritage that they have left behind, the research that they have conducted in their lives for us to read and benefit from, you find that the nature of the ulama is that they extrapolate the meanings, they struggle to give meaning to the words of the Ahlul Bayt alayhim salam. The words of the Ahlul Bayt, the ahadith, the du'as that they have left behind, the ziyarat that they have left behind, the wisdom that they have left behind, the ulama have taken a responsibility upon themselves to dissect the words of the Ahlul Bayt alayhim salam. So much so that we are able to understand the words of the Ahlul Bayt alayhim salam. And this is the struggle of the ulama. The beautiful dua of Kumail, a powerful dua that has the capacity to change the life of an individual. You find that the ulama have restlessly tried to understand and dissect the words of Amir al-Mu'mineen alayhi salam. When it comes to, for example, the ziyarat that we have, ziyarat al-Jami' al-Kabira, when it comes to understanding our sharia, our fiqh, as to what the Ahlul Bayt have instructed us to do and to not do, for example, all of this have been because of the struggles of the ulama. More so than that, our aqidah, what we believe in and what we ought to believe in. Oh, you find that many of our ulama have extrapolated the words of the Ahlul Bayt alayhim salam. They have researched in depth, trying to explain the nature of Tawheed that was envisaged by the Ahlul Bayt, the nature of Nabuwah that was envisaged by the Ahlul Bayt, the position of Imamah that was spoken of by the Ahlul Bayt alayhim salam themselves. When it comes to the struggles of the ulama, they have helped us understand the position of wilayah and how fundamental wilayah is within our lives. These are the heritage, these are the legacies and the struggles of the ulama, and we are indebted to them. That's why Allah says in the Holy Quran, إِنَّمَا يَخْشَى اللَّهَ مِنْ عِبَادِهِ ulama. That the ulama have the highest level of spirituality, and that is that they fear Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The heritage of the ulama is something that we should not belittle. When you look at, for example, the discipline that the ulama have established in their lives, many a times when we listen to the stories of the great maraja that have come before us, the great maraja that exist with us today, you find that there is a common theme that reoccurs in all of their lives, that from a very young age they enter the hawza, the disciplines, or the seminaries. And they maintain themselves in the seminaries for many decades, 70 years, 80 years. We have Maraja, for example, who have entered the seminaries at the age of 10. And today they are nearing 100 years. The discipline that the ulama have, that they are focused in a single, discipline for many decades, it's something that we should admire. In this day and age, you find that people, naturally, we all move from one aspect to another. We move from one platform to another. Yes, we have hobbies today which are different to the hobbies that we have a few weeks later. It's very easy for a person, especially amongst our youths, to be bored or to get bored in the lifestyle that we have. There's no sense of purpose in our lives. The ulama teaches us how to always search for a higher reality, how to focus on something which is far more greater, how to prioritize our lives such that we focus on that which has meaning, and then for us to be able to re-enhance or to be able to remotivate ourselves and give purpose to our lives. What's interesting here is There's a very interesting narration from the Imam alayhi salam, Amir al-Mu'mineen salawatullahi wa salamuhu alayhi. Outstanding narration in which he says that when it comes to the religion of Islam, the knowledge of Islam is so vast that it is far more greater than our capacities. So let me explain what this hadith means. Knowledge with regards to the religion of Islam is like the oceans and the seas. It's like the drops of the oceans and the seas. It's vast. If you were to count, for example, the drops of the oceans, you would say that it is infinite, so to speak. Likewise, the knowledge of the religion of Islam. Wherever you go and seek, you will gain benefit from it. And holistically speaking, the knowledge of the religion of Islam, all types of knowledge is good. But sometimes there are far greater knowledge that is out there which can be far more beneficial for us. And the beautiful dua that we recite after one of the ta'qibat of Salat al-Asr is what? Ya Allah, a'udhu bika min ilmin la yanfa. I seek your protection from the knowledge that does not benefit me. And many a times we become victims of this, that we enter a particular science knowing that it's a very interesting science, it's something that challenges us mentally, but in the end it has no benefit for us or for the people around us. Knowledge, don't mistake my words, knowledge with regards to the religion of Islam is good, but at times there are knowledge which are far better for us than all the other knowledge that exists. When you look at, for example, the oceans, you refer to the fisherman. A fisherman who wants to catch fish, he knows exactly which areas to go through in order to be able to catch certain fishes. Yes, he wouldn't just, for example, throw his net in any random area in the ocean and then expect to find fish. No, the fisherman who is very well versed in the different fishes that exist in the ocean will tell you that if you want certain types of fishes, you would go to this area. If you, for example, are interested in scuba diving, you would go to that particular area in the oceans. If you're interested in, for example, sighting some whales, you go to certain areas of the ocean. Yes? So naturally, the fisherman knows exactly where to look for in order to be able to catch fishes. Likewise, for us to be able to understand where knowledge or what type of knowledge is beneficial for us, we need to go to certain sciences that allows us to be able to achieve this benefit. You find that naturally it's for this reason that a person, a Muslim, should always refer back to the ulama. The ulama are capable of helping us understand what knowledge is good for us and what knowledge is not so beneficial for us. An alim, when he understands the life that I live, when he understands this type, the standard of my life, for example, will be able to tell me that it's important that you search for this type of knowledge. If you were to go and search for other types of knowledge, yes, you'll benefit from it. Your knowledge, your ilm will increase, but ultimately it will have no benefit for you in the way you live your life. So it's ultimately important for us to refer to the ulama. And the idea behind this is that the ulama become a sense of our reference point. And so for this reason, you find that there are many riwayat that speak about the position of the ulama, and the merits of the ulama, and the rewards of the ulama. One of the merits of the ulama is that on the day of judgment they will be given the power of shafa'ah. The power of shafa'ah is one of the greatest things that a human being can hold. Imagine on the day of judgment when Allah turns to you and gives you the power to take other individuals towards the kingdoms of heaven. Is there any power greater than the power of shafa'ah? One of the shufa'ah are the ulama on the day of judgment. But likewise, when you flip the entire discussion over, you realize that just as there are riwayat speaking about the position and the profundity of the positions of the ulama, you have certain riwayat that speak about the ulama as-su', the evil ulama, the ulama who propose demonic thoughts, who propose, for example, different sciences that sway the people away from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Just as how Allah speaks about, and the Ahlul Bayt speak about the ulama who are good, they spend enough time speaking about the ulama who are evil as well. The imams or the a'immah who guide the people towards the fires of hell. And so in tonight's discussion, I want to go through very briefly the different characteristics and the descriptions of the ulama who are evil in nature. And you find that this discussion is something that has been reverberated by the Ahl al-Bayt many a times over, in the sense that in their time, you find that there were certain ulama who were responsible in deceiving the people. Purposely, intentfully, they deceive the people so that there is loyalty given to the Bani Abbas or the likes of the Bani Umayyah. Slowly, these ulama became or held very powerful positions in their communities, and their job simply was to deter the people away from the truth. When you look at the whole saga of Karbala, you realize that Karbala was headed by the ulama, the likes of Umar ibn Sa'ad. Umar ibn Sa'ad, don't think that he was just a random person that Ibn Ziyad picked from the streets and gave him the responsibility to kill Abu Abdullah alayhi salam. Umar ibn Sa'ad was, according to some thoughts, he was an alim from amongst the ulama. He had a very close relationship with Imam al-Husseini alayhi salam, with Muslim ibn Aqil, but then ultimately he became a traitor towards these holy personalities. You find, for example, in the time of Muawiyah ibn Abi Sufyan, Muawiyah sought the guidance of his scholars to reinstate or to instate the likes of Yazid ibn Muawiyah in the position of power. Yazid ibn Muawiyah, people knew his background. People knew the type of person he was. A drinker, a gambler, a person who enjoyed music, a person who enjoyed women, for example. No one would have pledged allegiance to Yazid ibn Muawiyah if Muawiyah had left him behind as a caliph. But using the words of the ulama of his time, you find that he was able to find a loophole and instate, for example, his son Yazid into power and give him the power of the Khilafah. You find, for example, even before that, Muawiyah ibn Abi Sufyan was able to capitalize on his dhulm. He was able to justify his dhulm again from the advices of the scholars that he gave power to. You find that, for example, one of the famous narrations that popped out, literally out of nowhere in the time of Muawiyah ibn Abi Sufyan, was the fact that a person who lives under the guidance of a unjust ruler, for example, if you have a leader who is unjust, a leader who is a zalim, the Holy Prophet of Islam has said that it becomes haram for a person to uprise against this zalim ruler, this the person who is a ja'ir, is an unjust ruler. It becomes haram for them to stand up to such a person. Why? Because of the fitna that would exist within the lands. Imagine, Islam is a religion, especially the movement of Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam reverberates this beautifully. Islam is a religion wherein a person should stand against an unjust ruler, not succumb and subdue themselves to the power of a unjust ruler, a zalim. But Muawiyah was able to capitalize his dhulm by proposing these ideas which were then infiltrated in the minds of the masses. So you find that on the one hand, just as how there are riwayat speaking about the fada'il of the ulama, you find that there are riwayat that speak and give warnings to the ulama who are or have evil intentions. So now let's look at, for example, some of the characteristics and descriptions of the ulama who are evil. Because many a times, we as laymen were not able to understand which alim is good and which alim has evil intentions. But you find that the Ahl al-Bayt in their riwayat, they categorically explain to us that there are certain features that we need to look out for. Look out for these features and be aware. This is an individual responsibility that you and I have. Be aware as to what type of an alim a person can be. So the first characteristic, and something this is reverberated throughout the Holy Quran, repeated in many verses of the Holy Quran, is when a person believes in something, when a person has knowledge of something, but his actions are completely against what he has knowledge of. The Quran speaks about the importance of ilm and amal. When a person has knowledge, that knowledge has to be translated into action. When knowledge is not translated into action, that is the first sign of an alim who is not reputable, an alim who cannot be trusted. As in, imagine, For example, within the religion of Islam, you have many of these wonderful riwayat that speak about akhlaq, how to be humble, how to not be arrogant. The more ilm you have, the more humility one should establish within their lives. How a person should be charitable, how a person should, for example, help the poor and the needy of the community. What if there was an alim who wrote books, voluminous books of how to be humble, voluminous books of how to, for example, establish humility in your lives and not be arrogant, but then in the private lives they are arrogant. In their private lives they are not men of humility. As in, would you be able to trust such an alim? Let me give you an example. If a doctor was to prescribe a medicine for a particular illness, but then when he is succumbed to that particular illness, he does not take his own medicine. He'll prescribe it to his patients, but he himself will not administer it to himself. Would that make you trust in the medicine that the doctor has prescribed for you? As in something closer to home, we've just lived through a pandemic. Let's say, for example, hypothetically, you have certain companies, they've created the vaccination, but then those creators of the vaccinations themselves don't administer themselves with the vaccination. They give it to the billions in the world, but they themselves don't protect themselves using the vaccination. Would it make you trust the vaccination in the first place? Let me give you another example. We live in a world of social media, where there is, for example, a heavy emphasis on Facebook, on Twitter, on Instagram. The youth of our lives is part and parcel with social media. But then those who promote social media, the creators of such social medias, the creators of, for example, technology like the iPad, they make sure, they sell it. They market it in such a way that we as customers, we as consumers have to purchase it to make it part, to be in such a way that we believe that it's part and parcel of our lives. But they themselves have publicly come forward and said that we make sure not to give these same items to our children. The iPad, for example, it's something that is part and parcel of our lives and the lives of our children. But then the creators of the iPads have publicly come forward and said that this item will never be found in the hands of our children. Does it make you trust that the product is something good and beneficial for us, especially social medias that exist in the world today? So naturally, when you have an alim who on the one hand promotes goodness, who promotes, for example, good mannerism, good akhlaq, but then privately, or for example, publicly in certain areas of his life, he does not practice what he preaches, naturally you question his authority as an alim. The famous ayah in the Holy Quran, Allah says, Ya ayyuhalladhina amanu, O you who believe, why do you say what you do not believe? Why do you say what you do not act upon? Kabura maqtan indallah. The worst thing in the eyes of Allah is when you preach without practicing. When you do not practice what you preach. And this is directed towards the mu'mineen. Imagine the ulama. The ulama are greater than the mu'mineen. The mu'mineen are you and I. Yes, the ulama are those who have studied and have exhausted their entire lives, decades of their lives studying the religion of Islam. Beautiful hadith of the Holy Prophet of Islam, sallallahu alayhi wa alayhi, when he comes forward and he says, أَشَدُّ النَّاسِ عَذَابًا يَوْمَ الْقِيَامَةِ, that the worst type of people on the day of judgment that will be given the worst of punishments is an alim, لَمْ يَنْفَعْهُ ilmuh, is an alim who did not benefit from his knowledge. Yes, he gathered all of the different types of knowledge, but he did not translate that knowledge practically in his life. Al-alimu la yuntafa'u bi'ilmih. This is another beautiful hadith of the Holy Prophet of Islam, a wasiyah that he leaves behind for Abu Dharr al-Ghafari. He says the worst type of people on the day of judgment are those from amongst the ulama. They did not benefit others with their ilm. This is another category. What does this mean? It means that there are certain ulama. They gathered knowledge in their lives, but they chose to keep that knowledge for themselves. Knowledge is a bounty of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Allah blesses certain personalities with knowledge, just as how He blesses certain personalities with wealth, just as how He blesses certain personalities with health. And so naturally, when we have certain bounties and blessings from Allah, we have a responsibility behind it as well. When Allah has given me, for example, abundance of wealth, I make sure that I make it my responsibility to share that wealth with the people who do not have wealth. When I have health, for example, Allah has given me a strong physique, a strong body. Let me try and give some of my time and my effort supporting the mu'mineen in the community. When Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, for example, has given me certain influences and positions within the society, I should try that to support the people in my community, people who are, for example, from amongst the downtrodden within the society. Not try and amass wealth and more power and influence for myself. Sometimes I need to give back to the community, the same community that supported me when I was young. I should give back. I should give back to that support, to that community. This is one of the manifestations of shukr of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. When Allah says be grateful towards Him, many verses speak about the importance of being grateful towards Allah. It doesn't mean that I have a tasbih in my hand and I just carry on saying shukr alhamdulillah. Or I keep on reciting, for example, 2 rak'ah of shukr as-salah or salat al-shukr. The responsibility that I have is that I take some of these bounties and I physically give back to the community. Likewise, if Allah has given me knowledge, I should give back to the community. There are many fitnas that exist within the community. I know that I can try and dissolve many of these fitnas by speaking about haqq, but I choose not to do anything. I choose to sit back and not get involved. Some people, they say, we don't want to get involved in the community. Why? Because of the politics that exists. But there is a higher responsibility than the politics that exists within giving back to the community. And that at times is sharing the knowledge and the experience that you have gathered over many years. The wisdom that you have, when you share it back to the community, this becomes a responsibility. It's not sufficient for us to just sit back and say, well, there are certain evils within my community, and therefore for that reason I will not get involved. No. The hadith says that the worst type of people on the Day of Judgment is an alim that does not give his knowledge to the people around him. So therefore, when you come across an alim, a person who has knowledge but does not translate that knowledge practically in his life, is an alim who cannot be trusted. And this is perfectly normal and something that accommodates the aql as well. There's a beautiful hadith of the Ma'asum when he comes forward and he says, مَثَلَ الَّذِينَ يُعَلِّمُ النَّاسِ الْخَيْرِ. The likeness of an alim who speaks about goodness to the people. He tells his people to be good, but وَيَنْسَ نَفْسَ, but he forgets himself, is the likeness of a candle. The candle gives hidayah to others. It gives light towards others, but the candle itself burns. The candle itself burns, but at the same time it gives goodness towards others. There's a beautiful story of the likeness of Ayatollah Naraqi. Ayatollah Naraqi, they say he's written a book, a 2-volume book on akhlaq, Jami' al-Sa'adat. Fundamental book, profound book. Any speaker that speaks about akhlaq, guaranteed they have researched certain elements of his topic from this particular book. They say that when he wrote this book, he wrote this book, it was published, it was something that people began to read, people began to study even in his time. Ayatollah Naraqi, one day he goes towards the city of Najaf. The Ayatollah al-Uzma at the time was Sayyid Muhammad Mahdi, Bahar al-Ulum. Sayyid Muhammad Mahdi, Bahar al-Ulum, was the great marja of the time. And of course, when Ayatollah Naraqi went towards the city of Najaf from Tehran, naturally, it was the custom of the people at the time to come and visit him. So the local scholars would come towards Ayatollah Naraqi himself. So all of the scholars and the teachers and the students of the Hawza, of the seminaries, they came and they visited Ayatollah Naraqi. But then he realized that, hold on a second, all of these people have come to visit me. But the one person that has not come to visit me, the one person that I wish to meet is the Ayatollah himself, Muhammad Mahdi, Bahr al-Ulum. He says, he hasn't come to visit me. Let me go see him. He went towards the house of Bahr al-Ulum, Ayatollah, Rahmatullah alayh. He knocks on the door. One of the servants opens the door. He says, I've come to see Sayyid al-Bahr al-Ulum. Sayyid al-Bahr al-Ulum tells the servant, he tells him, tell al-Naraqi, Rahmatullah alayh, tell him that I'm busy. Perhaps some other time I'll come and see him. Ayatollah Naraqi doesn't think much of it. He turns around, he goes back home. The next day he comes back to the house of Sayyid al-Bahr al-Ulum. Knocks on the door, the servant opens the door, and then he tells Ayatollah Naraki that Sayyid Mahdi is very, very busy, is unable to see you. This, according to the customs of the time, was seen extremely rude. It wasn't acceptable behavior, especially coming from the likes of an Ayatollah al-Udhma of the time, the great Grand Marja of the time. Ayatollah Naraki, again, he doesn't think much of it. He goes back home. The third day he comes back, he starts knocking on the door. He says, I've come the third day to meet a Sayyid Mahdi, Bahrul Ulum. He says, unfortunately, the Sayyid is very, very busy. He's unable to see you at this moment in time. Perhaps he will see you some other time. Ayatollah Naraki again doesn't think much of it. He turns around, he goes back home. As he leaves the premises, they say Sayyid Mahdi Bahrul Ulum comes running behind him. When he meets Sayyid Sheikh al-Naraki, when he meets Allama al-Naraki, he embraces him. He embraces him. They hugs him. He greets him with a fine greeting. And he says, you know what, for 3 days I ignored you. For 3 days I ignored you. And the reason why is because you wrote an entire book on akhlaq. You wrote an entire book on akhlaq and you taught the people how to behave. And I wanted to test you. If your theory, if your knowledge is translated in your action, and I tell you, and I testify to Allah that your akhlaq is just as how you have described it in your book. I wish to test you, and I see that you are a remarkable man. You practice what you preach. And so, naturally, you find that Ayatollah Naraki, a famous story that has been established within our madhab, you find that Ayatollah Naraki, his book is something that we always refer back to and study. The reason being is because he poured his heart and his soul into it. He practiced everything that he preached in that particular book. Whenever you come across an alim who does not practice what he preaches, you'll find that over a time period, his reputation will be taken away from him. And I say this out of the experience that I have seen certain ulama in my time, and of course those who have come before us, same things have happened to them. Many of the ulama we remember today, the likes of Shaykh al-Mufid, the likes of Shaykh al-Saduq, these are profound ulama. They lived many centuries before us. Why do we remember them? We remember them because of their efforts. If there was any ill intent in their hearts, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would have left their legacy undetected. Their legacies would have not been known for us. Today we speak of them as if they existed just yesterday. So the first element or the first description of an alim who is from amongst the evil ulama are those who do not practice what they preach. They say one thing but they behave in another. Then you have the likeness of the second characteristics, the second description of the ulama is when they have sincerity in their hearts. Sincerity, ikhlas and niyyah. Purely for the sake of Allah. The idea behind this is that they gain knowledge simply to please Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Some of you may ask the question, well, hold on a second. How do I know whether an alim has sincere intentions in his heart or no? Sincerity is not something that you can detect physically. It resides in the heart. Sahih. But just as how we don't know what they believe in their hearts, I guarantee you one thing, that whatever resides in their heart will eventually be transmitted either through their words or through their actions. When someone harbors anger and aggression towards someone else, he'll keep it in their heart for as long as they can. But then eventually that anger and that aggression will manifest itself either through words or through their actions. And that's something profound that we need to look out for. Spirituality. We're all interested in the discussions of spirituality. Spirituality is when a person is able to subdue his anger and not let it transmit through his words and his actions. So from this perspective, a person who has sincerity in his intentions, that alim is considered to be from the fudala. But a person who harbors ill intentions in their hearts, they belong to the ulama who are evil, unfortunately, who have demonic intentions. How can we clarify if an alim has demonic intentions, has ill intentions in their hearts? There's a beautiful hadith of the Imam alayhi salam. Beautiful hadith. Pay attention to this hadith. He says, Man talaba al-ilma, whosoever seeks knowledge, لأربع دخل النار. There are 4 types of people who seek knowledge. On the day of judgment, they will be taken towards the fires of hell. How is it possible for an alim to enter the fires of hell? It's just not something that we have heard before. We're not accustomed to such discussions. There's a beautiful hadith. Before I carry on with this hadith, let me share with you a very powerful, hard-hitting hadith. The Imam alayhi salam says on the day of judgment, 3 groups of people will be judged first. The first will be the shaheed. How great is the shaheed? How great is the maqam of the shaheed who gave his life, who gave his entire life, the greatest asset in his hands for the sake of Islam. He will be brought forth in front of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Allah will say to him, or the malaika will say to him, you gave your life for the religion of Islam. The shaheed will be smiling. And then the angels will ask him, why did you give your life for the religion of Islam? The shaheed will say, I gave my life for the religion of Islam because I believed in its values and its principles. I believe that Islam was far greater than my own life. The angels will say, no. You gave your life for the religion of Islam so that the people can turn around and say, he was a shaheed. It wasn't for Allah, it was for the people. The second group will be the Qur'an, the Qari al-Quran, the people who recite the verses of the Holy Quran. And I tell you, simply by reciting or listening to the verses of the Quran, when it is recited with a beautiful voice, with the tajweed, it has the power to move the heart. There are people who come running towards the religion of Islam simply by reciting or by reading or by listening to the Holy Quran. It affects the soul. The Qari al-Quran will be brought forth for judgment. The Malaika will say, why did you read the Quran? The Qur'an will say that we read the Quran simply because it is the word of God and it is a beautiful word and to be at the service of the people. The Malaika will say, no, you read the Quran to please the people so that the people can turn around and say that that is Al-Qari al-Quran. The third will be the alim. The Malaika will say, why did you gain knowledge? He said, I gained knowledge to safeguard the message of the Ahlul Bayt. He says, no, you gain knowledge so that the people turn around and say that was an alim. All of these 3 will be taken towards the fires of hell, simply because their intention was based on ill intentions. There was no sincerity towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So here in this hadith, you find, for example, the Imam comes forward and he says there are 4 types of people who will be taken towards the fires of hell. Those who are from amongst the ulama. Which type of ulama? Yubahi bihil ulama. They gain knowledge simply to debate, simply to rub in the faces of the ulama. They gain a bit of knowledge, they gain a bit of, for example, wisdom. They take that knowledge and they rub it in the faces of the other ulama. They challenge the other ulama. Yujadilu bihi al-ulama. They constantly argue. They constantly debate. A person gains the knowledge of Islam simply to debate with the ulama. How many of these people we see nowadays? This alim, he doesn't know the way how we live our lives in the West. This alim is very backward minded. This alim, he doesn't know, for example, the challenges that I face with living within the West. You find that there are certain people who gain knowledge, and the motivation for them gaining knowledge is to later on come and debating and arguing with the scholars who are already established within the system. There's a beautiful story of Sayyid al-Khoi. They say that when you examine the text of Sayyid al-Khoi rahmatullah alayhi, many of his istimbat, many of his conclusions were vastly different from the conclusions of Shaykh al-Tusi. The whole methodology behind Shaykh al-Tusi's extrapolation of law and the methodology of Sayyid al-Khoi was vastly different. And Sayyid al-Khoi many a times would say, look, Shaykh al-Tusi has come to certain conclusions which are different to my conclusions. I have come to certain elements and I believe that what he thought was wajib is not considered to be wajib. But then ultimately in the end he says, you know what, even if Shaykh al-Tusi considered it to be wajib, let's say a particular mas'ala, even if Shaykh al-Tusi considered it to be wajib, I will align myself with his opinion. Even though my opinion is vastly different to his, even though my conclusion is vastly different to his. Why? Ya Sayyid al-Khu'i rahmatullah alayh. He says the reason is because perhaps there was a particular evidence that he had access to in his time, which we don't have access to now. How can I challenge the likes of Shaykh al-Tusi? And then often, many a times in his Risalat al-Amaliyah, he would say, Ahwat al-Wujub. Based on precaution, it's wajib. Even though in his research, he doesn't even consider it to be wajib, out of respect for the likes of Shaykh al-Tusi. Today, you'll have certain members of our communities, they'll go to the house at the seminaries for 3-4 years. Yes, they'll learn some forms of knowledge, but then they have the audacity to challenge the higher authorities within our system, within our madhab, from amongst them the maraji'. Why? Because you've gained a bit of knowledge whilst you spend 3-4 years in Najaf or Qom. There has to be humility when it comes to the sciences of learning Islam. Then he says, وَيُمَارِ بِهِ السُّفَهَاء, and they constantly argue with the sufaha. The sufaha, the laymen like you and I. Actually, the sufaha are worse than the laymen, the people who are foolish. The ulama, they gain knowledge, or the person who gains knowledge simply to argue with those who are foolish within the community. They prescribe certain things, they create illusions of knowledge when it's not even considered to be knowledge in the first place. That's why it's important to always refer to the Ahl al-Khabra, especially in this regards. You and I, when we come across certain personalities, their words will tell us that they are from amongst the ulama. Why? Because we don't understand the sciences that they're talking. Many a times there are certain speakers out there, yes, from amongst our ulama, the way they speak can be attractive, the way, the energy that they have, for example, the books that they have written, the words that they use, it makes us feel as if they are from the higher echelons from amongst the ulama. But when you refer to the Ahl al-Khabra, those who are experienced in this particular field, they'll say that this person, there is no knowledge behind his words. You look at, for example, in this world today. Currently, you have this new atheistic movement. Many books have been published, A Universe from Nothing, The God Delusion, for example. Many of these are bestsellers, millions of copies translated, or millions of copies sold, hundreds of languages, been translated into hundreds of languages. People are now flocking into atheism, abandoning religion altogether. But then when you actually open these books and you read the arguments that they are using, you realize that these are fallacious arguments that have no meaning whatsoever. But they capitalize by arguing with the foolish people. They capitalize by arguing with the laymen, simply because the laymen are not studied in certain areas. And so, the alim who gains knowledge simply to dupe the foolish people or to dupe the laymen, they will be those from Ahl al-Nar. They misguided the people of their time simply because of the knowledge they gained. Then لِيَصْرِفَ بِهِ وُجُوهَ النَّاسِ إِلَيْهِ. They gain knowledge simply to attract the people towards them. That's it. There's no motivation to, for example, defend the madhab of the Ahl al-Bayt. There's no motivation to spread the message of Islam. The absolute motivation in their hearts is to develop a following. How many views they get on YouTube, how many subscribers they get on their channels. That's their motive. That's their essential motive in gaining knowledge. To establish a following. To establish a following. And naturally you find that the hadith, they speak about very clearly the descriptions of the ulama who are evil. And these are their qualities, these are their descriptions. And then the third description is when an alim who is pure, an alim who has great sincerity in his heart, is an alim who is considered to be a zahid, an alim who is abstinent. Yes, he may be rich, he may be affluent, but that money or his financial status does not affect his position as an alim. But then there are certain ulama, they are attracted by the world and what the world can give them. They are attracted by the desires of the world. It's not just the laymen who are attracted by the world. Even the ulama are attracted by the world. Beautiful hadith of the Imam alayhi salam. He says, Mazdad abdan ilma, when a slave of Allah increases his knowledge, When there is an increment in knowledge, فَازْدَادَ فِي الدُّنْيَا رَغْبَةً. There is the increment in the interest towards the world. As knowledge increases, his desires for the world, his appetite for the world increases as well. إِلَّا ازْدَادَ مِنَ اللَّهِ بُعْدًا. But what truly is increased in their lives is that they have separated themselves from Allah. And the separation increases as their knowledge increases. Just recently, we saw the passing of one of our greatest Maraja, Sayyid Ayatollah Sayyid Muhammad Sa'id al-Hakim. Profound personality. May Allah bless his soul. Rahmatullah alayhi. They say that he had 3 teachers in his time when he was young. The first was his grandfather, his maternal grandfather, Sayyid Muhammad, Sayyid Muhsin al-Hakim. Rahmatullah alayhi. Famous marja of his time. The second of his teachers was Sayyid al-Khu'i, Rahmatullah alayhi. But then there was a third teacher that no one knows of, unfortunately. The third teacher went by the name of Sheikh Hussein al-Hilli. Sheikh Hussein al-Hilli, they say he was of the same platform as Sayyid Muhsin al-Hakim and Sayyid al-Khu'i. He was of the same level. The people came towards him and they said, Sheikh Hussein, you should become a marja of your time. You have definitely the knowledge, you have the capacity. He turned around and he said, I'm not interested. The position of marja'iyya is a position of fame. It is a position of financial wealth, for example, the amount of khums that comes into your hands. But it also means that it is a position of responsibility. When you often become a marja of your time, yes, you become a reference point for millions of people around the world. He says, I can't handle that responsibility. I'm not interested in that responsibility. Imagine the zuhd of such a person. Even though he knows that potentially he may be duped by the attractions of the world. He says, I'm happy where I am. I'm happy teaching the next generations of the ulama. What a wonderful personality he was. You look at the likeness of Nabi Sulaiman in the Holy Quran. Nabi Sulaiman, he turns to Allah, he says, Ya Allah, increase or give me a kingdom. Give me a kingdom that no other person has had before me and no other person will have after me. Why? Prophet of Allah, Alim, Kabir, Azim. Why is he asking for the world from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? One of the opinions was to show the people that regardless of how rich and how powerful and how influential he was as a prophet, as an alim of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that never moved him away from Allah. That Allah is the source of his knowledge, that Allah is the source of his wealth, that he is nothing in comparison to Allah. قُلِ اللَّهُمَّ مَالِكِ الْمُلْكِ تُؤْتِ الْمُلْكَ مَنْ تَشَاءُ وَتَنْزِعُ مُلْكَ مِمَّنْ تَشَاءُ. Just as how Allah has given mulk to you, he can take it away from you. Then you refer to the likeness of Umar ibn Sa'ad. Umar ibn Sa'ad, the motivation to participate on the 10th of Muharram was simply because he was promised the governorship of Ray. Ibn Ziyad said to him, you become the governor of Ray, and that will be your reward for slaughtering Abu Abdullah alayhi salam. He was an alim, he was a faqih. He knew the position of Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam. They say Imam al-Hussein met him just a few nights before the 10th of Muharram. He says, Ya Umar ibn Sa'ad, what has happened of you? What has happened to you? Why have you changed your position and your stance? You used to be those who knew our position, but now you stand and you are actively willing to kill us and slaughter us. Umar ibn Sa'ad, he says to Abu Abdullah, he says, I fear for my house that they will come and they will destroy my house. Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam says to him, I will rebuild for you a new house. Join us. Umar ibn Sa'ad, he says, I fear that they will seize my properties and assets. He says, doesn't matter. I will secure your properties and your assets for you. I promise that you will have more. He says, I fear the lives of my family. He says, I promise security for your family. Umar ibn Sa'ad remained silent. His lost excuses to stand alongside Abu Abdullah alayhi salam. And so naturally, you found that the Imam said to him, he said, Ya Umar ibn Sa'ad, what happened to you? That you now betray us, the Ahl al-Bayt. May Allah kill you in your sleep. And you find that later on he was killed, he was assassinated in his own bed. Umar ibn Sa'ad, he knew the position of Muslim Aqil. He invited Muslim towards the city of Kufa, but then he betrayed him. Likewise, he knew the position of Abu Abdullah, and eventually he betrayed Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam as well. On the 10th of Muharram, after the battle of Karbala. After the battle of Karbala, it was the same Umar ibn Sa'ad that came forward and ordered 10 horsemen to trample on the body of Abu Abdullah alayhi salam. When they mounted their rides, they began trampling on the bodies of Abu Abdullah alayhi salam. When Zainab heard the crackings, when she heard the noise of cracking glass, she turned to Imam al-Sajjad, she said to him, Yabna Rasulullah, what's that sound? I hear the sounds of the cracking of glass. Upon which Imam al-Sajjad responds, he says, oh my aunt, they are trembling on the body of my father. It's his chest being squashed, it's his chest being trampled upon by the hooves of the horses. There's one narrator, and he mentions this beautifully. He says that when we gathered the women and we took them across the sands of Karbala and they witnessed the bodies of the martyrs, Wallah fa wallahi la ansa Zainab bint Ali ibn Abi Talib wa hiya tandub al-Hussein. He says, Wallah, I will never forget what Zainab said when she saw the body of her brother Abu Abdullah. When she saw Abu Abdullah وتنادي بصوت حزين وقلب كئيب, when she began to shriek with a broken heart, with a shattered heart, she cried out, Wa Muhammad, hadha Husaynun bil ara. She cries out, Oh Muhammad, it says, Oh grandfather, this is Hussein who has been abandoned in the lands of Karbala, murammilum bid-dima, and his body has been drenched in his own blood, muqatta al-a'dha, and his limbs have been severed from his body, mahzuz al-ra's min al-qafa, and his neck has been separated, his head has been separated from his head, mahzuz al-ra's min al-qafa, masloob al-amamati wal-rida, and his cloak and his amama, his turban have been taken away from him, wa banatuka as-sabaya, and your daughters, Ya Rasulullah, have been taken as prisoners, who are then eventually dragged from Karbala to Kufa and from Kufa to Sham. There's a beautiful narration, lines of poetry that Zainab, that Kulthum, that Fatima, the daughter of Abi Abdullah, they keep on relaying these lines of poetry towards Ibn Ziyad and towards Yazid ibn Muawiyah in Sham. They came and they said, ماذا تقولون إن قال النبي لكم. She said to them, she said, what will you say if the Prophet of Allah stood before you and said to you, ماذا فعلتم وأنتم آخر الأمم. What have you done, knowing that you are the best of Ummah, that you are the final of nations, my nation بإطرتي وأهل بيتي بعد مفتقدي. What have you done to my family, my flesh and bone, with my household after I left you? منهم أسارى ومنهم ذرجوا بدم, and from amongst them you have made as prisoners of war, and from amongst them you have slaughtered and abandoned in the lands of Karbala. When Abu Hamza Thumali came towards Imam al-Sajjad, he says to him, Yabna Rasulullah, why is it that you cry and lament for your grandfather? Why do you cry and lament for your father, knowing that your father died many many decades before. Imam al-Sajjad replies, Ya Aba Hamza, Ya Aba Hamza, Wallah, Yaqub had 12 sons and one son was taken away from him, yet he cried and cried until his eyes went blind. Do not blame me when I saw members of my family slaughtered before me. Aba Hamza then says to him, يا ابن رسول الله يا ابن رسول الله القتل لكم عادة والشهادة منكم والشهادة كرامتكم من الله. But killing and assassination is part and it's become normal in your family, and shahada is part and normal in your family, and it's a karama, it's a blessing from Allah. Why do you still cry for your father Abi Abdullah? Upon which Imam al-Sajjad replies, he says, Ya Aba Hamza, Sa'adak Allah, Ya Aba Hamza. Sahih, qatl and shahada is part and parcel of our family. But my women were taken as prisoners and they were dragged from one city to another. Tell me, Ya Aba Hamza, is this a norm in my family for them to be taken as prisoners of war, for them to be humiliated in the masses, in the eyes of the masses? And then he says, لما وقعت عيناي إلى الأمات وبناتي يا أبا حمزة, whenever I glance towards my aunts and my daughters and my sisters, يا أبا حمزة, إلا وذكرت فرارهن يوم عاشوراء, all I remember is them escaping from on the 10th of Muharram, من خيمة إلى خيمة, from one tent towards another, حتى ينادي المنادي احرقوا بيوت الظالمين, until we could hear the cries of one man saying, burn, burn the houses or the tents of Ali Muhammad. إنا لله وإنا إليه راجعون. سيعلم الذين ظلموا أي منقلب ينقلبون. رحم الله من قرأ سورة الفاتحة. بسم الله الرحمن
Ya Hussein, 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 hey, hey, Zainab, hey, hey, Sham, 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 hey, hey, Zainab, hey, hey, Sham. बिन्ते ज़हरा का खुला सर है, खुदा खैर करे. बिन्ते ज़हरा का खुला सर है, खुदा खैर करे. बिन्ते ज़हरा का खुला सर है, खुदा खैर करे. बिन्ते ज़हरा का खुला सर है, खुदा खैर करे. बिन्ते ज़हरा का खुला सर है, खुदा खैर करे. बिन्ते ज़हरा का खुला सर है, खुदा खैर करे. बिन्ते ज़हरा का खुला सर है, खुदा खैर करे. زہرا کا خلاصہ ہے خدا خیر کرے بنت زہرا کا خلاصہ ہے خدا خیر کرے بنت زہرا کا خلاصہ ہے خدا خیر کرے بنت زہرا کا خلاصہ ہے خدا خیر کرے اور ہر ہاتھ میں پتھر ہے خدا خیر کرے بنت زہرا کا خلاصہ 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 ہے خدا خیر کرے حر کے بیٹے پہ ہی شبیر بہت روئے تھے حر کے بیٹے پہ ہی شبیر بہت روئے تھے اب تو لاش علی اکبر ہے خدا خیر کرے بنت زہرا کا خلاصہ 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 ہے خدا خیر کرے مارتے ہیں وہاں نیزوں کو زمیں پر ظالم مارتے ہیں وہاں نیزوں کو زمیں پر ظالم دفن جس جالی اصغر ہے خدا خیر کرے بنت زہرا کا خلاصہ 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 ہے خدا خیر کرے کچھ قدم دور کھڑی دیکھ رہی ہے زینب کچھ قدم دور کھڑی دیکھ رہی ہے زینب شمر کے ہاتھ میں خنجر ہے خدا خیر کرے بنت زہرا کا خلاصہ 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 ہے خدا خیر کرے ہے چری ہاتھ میں ظالم کے لبوں پر ہے ہنسی ہے چری ہاتھ میں ظالم کے لبوں پر ہے ہنسی کشت میں شہ کا رکھا سر ہے خدا خیر کرے بنت زہرا کا خلاصہ 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 ہے خدا خیر کرے لاش عباس پہ جاتا ہے دکھانے کے لیے لاش عباس پہ جاتا ہے دکھانے کے لیے
کھلا سر ہے خدا خیر کرے بنت زہرا کا کھلا سر ہے خدا خیر کرے کچھ قدم دور کھڑی دیکھ رہی ہے زینب کچھ قدم دور کھڑی دیکھ رہی ہے زینب شمر کے ہاتھ میں خنجر ہے خدا خیر کرے بنت زہرا کا کھلا سر ہے خدا خیر کرے بنت زہرا کا کھلا سر ہے خدا خیر کرے بنت زہرا کا کھلا سر ہے خدا خیر کرے بنت زہرا کا کھلا سر ہے خدا خیر کرے ہے چری ہاتھ میں ظالم کے لبوں پر ہے ہنسی ہے چری ہاتھ میں ظالم کے لبوں پر ہے ہنسی تشت میں شہ کا رکھا سر ہے خدا خیر کرے بنت زہرا کا کھلا سر ہے خدا خیر کرے بنت زہرا کا کھلا سر ہے خدا خیر کرے بنت زہرا کا کھلا سر ہے خدا خیر کرے یا حسین 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 اور محمد و آل محمد صلوات
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم السلام عليك يا رسول الله السلام عليك يا علي المرتضى السلام عليك يا فاطمة الزهراء السلام عليك يا حسن المجتبى السلام عليك يا حسين الشهيد بكربلاء السلام عليك يا علي بن الحسين زين العابدين ومحمد الباقر وجعفر الصادق وموسى القاظم وعلي الرضا ومحمد تقي وعلي النقي والحسن العسكري ورحمة الله وبركاته السلام عليك يا صاحب العصر والزمان الأمان 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 من فتنة الزمان السلام عليك يا شريك القرآن وقابة الإيمان وإمامنا وإمام الإنس والجان أجل الله تعالى فرجك وسهر الله تعالى مخرجك وظهورك ورحمة الله وبركاته اللهم كن لوليك الحجة ابن حسن صلواتك عليه وعلى آبائه في هذه الساعة وفي كل ساعة وليا وحافظا وقائدا وناصرا ودليلا وعينا حتى تسكنه أرضك توعا وتمتعه فيها طويل يا أرحم الراحمين